Enemy of the state.
An enemy of the state.
Enemy of the state.
Dank Pod Stash.
All right, this is the very first episode. My name is Nick, and I'm here with David Ballantyne. How's it going, David?
I'm doing good. How about you?
Doing great. Really excited to be here recording this podcast with you. We'll share a little bit about ourselves. Pretty much just a little thing. We're both anarchists, we're both agorists, and we're taking some action in other ways, but also with the podcast here. So we're going to jump right into this first episode with a topic that's caused some disturbances in the community, which would be the migration of some anarchists to the Libertarian Party. The first big name that I remember was Adam Kokesh. Why don't you talk about that a little bit, David?
Yeah, the thing that struck me as odd about that was that he called for people to call down or to put down the voluntarist ideals in order to serve some kind of greater good, and that's just absurd.
Yeah, that's pretty ridiculous. So where did he issue that statement? Do you know? Was that just in his videos and stuff?
Videos. Somebody else had posted it. I've seen links to it now countless times. Somebody, I believe he does the Voluntary Japan podcast on YouTube. I'm not sure where else he's at. I know he talks about it. Graham Smith, he talks about it a lot.
Interesting. I heard Bill Weld just endorsed him yesterday or pretty recently as well, which, what a combination for the Libertarian Party. Kokesh Weld, huh?
Right? Gee.
That'd be something crazy.
With that, Kokesh had previously spoken out against Weld, and now that I hear that he's kind of flip-flopped on that.
Well, I mean, it would stand to reason that he would, speak out against him with Weld's stances on gun control and endorsement of Hillary and all that, and just clearly not being a libertarian and yet being pushed by the Libertarian Party. But I guess that's what we're here to talk about, the ridiculousness of then him joining the Libertarian Party and now they're buddies. I mean, where's the principles? What are they even standing for? And because it's certainly not liberty, and as you said, he's calling us to put down voluntarism for the greater good. I mean, how is that a good at all? It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling to me. Like, the contradictions everywhere. I don't think that I think it's just self-serving action, to be completely honest.
What do you think he's standing to gain from this?
I would figure that there's some kind of at least attention and popularity that one could gain by widening the ability to attract followers, the status followers and the followers from the more mini status followers of the Libertarian Party.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just crazy. With the things he's done in the past is involving money, without getting too specific, there's probably some motivation there as well. But so yeah. There might be some nefarious motivation when it comes to Kokesh. There might just be maybe misguidance. But to be honest, it didn't really surprise me too much. I don't know, just with him being who he is from what I've seen in videos and all that stuff, because I don't actually know him in person, so can't speak to his character in person, but just from the stuff I've seen online, it's just like, seems like something crazy you might do.
Yeah, he's definitely pulled some odd, seemingly scam, but I don't have a whole lot of evidence to support them being scammed that isn't necessarily hearsay.
Yeah, and with that, we don't even need to go into it if we don't have evidence or firsthand knowledge. So we don't want to do that to them. But the people that really surprised me, specifically one, as far as this migration of anarchists to the Libertarian Party, the main one that surprised the heck out of me, because I think he's a really smart guy and I enjoy his podcast and books and stuff, is Tom Woods. Tom Woods announced, I don't know if he announced, but he had a roundtable discussion on the Lions of Liberty podcast hosted by Mark Claire with himself, Jason Stapleton, Dave Smith, and Mance Rader, talking about their intention and action to join the Libertarian Party. Just a little about those guys. Jason Stapleton, I don't know a lot about Jason Stapleton and Dave Smith, other than that Jason Stapleton hosts the Jason Stapleton Program podcast, and Dave Smith hosts part of the Problem podcast, and he's also part of the Legion of Skanks comedian stuff. I know they've been on the Joe Rogan podcast and whatnot before. And then Mance Rader, he has the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast, a big social media presence, written a couple books, The Kids Aren't All Right and Freedom Through Memedom. And we see Mance around quite a bit in the circles that we're involved in, and that one was also pretty surprising. But as far as from a principles view, I think Tom Woods was the most surprising to me. He seemed like he would never be interested in getting into politics after, studying under Murray Rothbard and just everything he talks about.
Yeah, I can't speak too much on some of those people because I haven't had a chance to check out much of their work. But with Mance Rader, I've listened to a few of his podcasts. It's really odd to me that he would, the movement to just, in my mind, it's an anti-principle movement to go and involve oneself with, politics like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's just, you hit it on the head there, the anti-principles part. And let's see, there was one interesting episode of the Free Man Beyond the Wall podcast where he spoke to a guy named Sean Jones, who's running for Congress in the South Dallas area, who says he's a voluntarist and libertarian and is running for Congress. And he actually says you can't govern yourself into freedom, as he runs a campaign to be elected to government office. Now, in the podcast, he did say that he wouldn't be accepting any taxpayer money or anything that could be considered contributing, I guess, to the state or the state's aggression, and he'd be there to vote no or yes when it was consistent with libertarian philosophies. It goes back to the whole Kokesh thing. Kokesh had a debate with Larkin Rose that on the Anarchists that I thought was really, really good. And I think I sent you, or maybe posted in one of the groups, a little response to that. And Larkin Rose's main point there was you're legitimizing the circus that is, politics with the current government when you do that, no matter what you do. And you're involving yourself in that. So.
Yeah, Larkin's absolutely right with, you're not proving that you should, live for yourself and live, in a self-sustaining model away from the state. You're reinforcing the idea that you can say, hey, I don't want to do this. I want to give the power to this person to do this for me and fix all my problems. It's like voting for somebody to stop government is an insane thought.
It really is.
No, there's no chance, even if there was a libertarian government, like the libertarians had control, that they could ever, remove all the oppressive laws that are out there. And it would in a amount of time.
Yeah, straight out of the new Libertarian Manifesto.
Yeah, exactly. And not to mention that, what's going to happen the next election cycle? People are not going to like it. They're going to vote all of them out. You know what I mean? It's easily undone.
Extremely easily. And that's a question that I've thought of too now with all this going on, because I'm really interested in seeing their side of the reasoning for this, of joining the Libertarian Party and trying to, as they say, actually do something, which is extremely condescending to say that joining the LP is, you know, we're actually doing something and all the rest of you are just, you know, as literally Mance Raider said in his podcast, sitting in your fucking basements. And it's like, what? That's not what anyone else is doing. I mean, other people are doing that, but it's not what everybody's doing. And are you really putting in work when you're working with the government to get rid of the government? So the question that brought it, to give them the benefit of the doubt, the question I had is, how do we get out if we don't play the game? Like, what's the plan? And I know that can be answered if you read, you know, Konkin's work and others. But I ask that question because I want to be able to have an answer to give to these people who think that joining a party is the only way to get things done, because that can't be it.
It's absolutely not the way to get things done. It's counterintuitive to ending the oppression of the state. It doesn't make sense. I know that you agree, and you said that it sounded like at least Mance was coming from a place of fear with joining, worried about some collapse, and I agree with that.
Yeah, correct. That's what it sounded like in his podcast, was just all the reasons that he was giving for this were, like I said, and out of fear for the collapse, but also for things like, you know, what if we get just a horrible government, we turn into a fascist government or something, super Nazi-esque or whatever, and we haven't done anything to stop them because we didn't join another party to fight them. And the thing that it just seems so ridiculous to me is, like, how is a small party that clearly has no chance of winning the presidency right now, if he's so scared about becoming a fascist USA, like, how is that going to change anything? And he said he still doesn't intend on voting. He just wants to be a voice within the party to outsiders. But I don't see how, first of all, coming from a place of fear for the collapse, like you brought up, or insane government in the future, how making that decision is going to help anything. And it really comes back to, also, like you said, everyone wants someone else to solve their problems for them. And this is the underlying problem that is always there when talking to people about what needs to be done. Everybody's looking outwards, saying, oh, we got to join the LP. We got to even, you know, be involved in counter economics and stuff, which you absolutely should be. But the first thing everyone, in my opinion, and what I'm trying to do for myself, is to take responsibility for everything that I do towards a voluntarist end.
You're absolutely right. You have to look inwardly to solve these problems outside of yourself. If everyone was able to take care of themselves without relying on the state, dependent on the state, I mean, there's some of our there's some of the problems solved right there.
Absolutely.
Which is that. And yeah, it's insane. And if either of those two options happen, right? If there was a collapse, or if there was some crazy fascist government that is installed, wouldn't that help to wake people up to the just insanity that government is? Like, at least with the collapse, it would make it easier to start helping people move away from dependence on the state, right? You would be able to set up these pockets of, you know, counter economic activity and community and helping one another, because nobody would be able to rely on the state because it wasn't there, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And that's actually something I saw from someone earlier this morning. They were saying, you know, if there was a collapse, you know, and he was derogatively calling people libertarians. The libertarians would be just as screwed as everybody else, because they can't survive without government either. And I think what he's referring to is infrastructure and whatever else. But these people fail to realize that everything they think the government provides that we supposedly cannot survive without is provided by private industries, private businesses, and just paid for through government theft. It's just a huge oversight in that stupid fucking argument that people always bring to the table. And I think with the attitude that libertarians, and I'm going to say libertarians and anarchists and agorists, whatever, because I don't really mash all those into the same group anymore. Just because, word definitions and how shitty they've become lately. But the people with the right mindset, even if there is something terrible that happens, like you said, whether it being a fascist government or a collapse, we do have the right mindset to go into something like that and either resist or rebuild.
Yeah, exactly. I don't see it as necessarily being negative. Like, yeah, it would be terrible, but isn't obviously not a fascist state. It's definitely not any kind of end goal. But the collapse, that's economic collapse. That's kind of an end goal there. Like, if people started choosing a voluntary society right now, and the majority of people started doing it, that would happen. It's insane to be afraid of it, and to then, through that fear, go run to joining a political party to protect you. It doesn't make sense to me.
Well, and maybe some of that fear comes from the fact that some people aren't, like we said, taking that responsibility and preparing themselves for any situation, whether it's a collapse or preparing yourself for just showing other people what you're living. Because you can prepare the same way for both. Specifically, myself, I'll use myself as an example. I've moved out to the middle of nowhere. My wife and I have always gardened since we've been together. We like gardening and stuff like that. But just preparing in your own life as far as preparedness with food, shelter, all that stuff. Not that everyone needs to be an insane doomsday prepper. I'm not saying I live out in a cave in the middle of fucking nowhere with a million guns and a giant garden, but I live out on, decent property, and that's what we're doing. And then I read a shit ton and listen to a bunch of podcasts and prepare the mind. And I know you do the same.
It's all about self-sufficiency, and it seems a lot of people miss that when they start talking about dependence on government. They ignore the fact that they still go to a grocery store and things like that. It's not necessarily dependence on government. It's dependence on an infrastructure that may no longer be there for a time. And growing your food and collecting rainwater and learning how to do learning skill, that to me is a huge importance. Like, I can't stress that enough.
Yeah, absolutely.
This point I wanted to make. No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to agree with you. Absolutely. Learning a skill, whether it's something like gardening, which is never a bad skill because it's fun too. Gardening's awesome. It's fun to see the things that you grow come to fruition, but also maybe a trade or something like that is great. But yeah, go ahead with what you were going to say.
Oh yeah, to add to that, that's one of the things I love trading is I trade skill. Like, I know how to do this, you know how to do that. Let's teach each other. That's everybody benefits in that kind of situation. Man, I don't think people do enough of that. But yeah, a point I was going to make is I'm sure some of these people think that they're going to join DLP and then, have more of a voice and attract more people to voluntarist ideals and maybe anarchist ideals, whatever the term is that you want to use. But I think it's going to have an opposite effect. It's going to attract people to the wrong kind of thinking when it comes to party culture. Because a lot of people, especially I see with them, not all, definitely not all, but a lot of people within the Libertarian Party, they get really bogged down in the party itself, and it becomes all about the party image. What is the party doing? What are we doing with the party? And they lose sight. You know, I see it constantly in discussion with people who tell me that I'm not doing anything because I'm not joining the Libertarian Party and I'm not involved in, this caucus or that caucus or, etc. And people, they get involved in party hierarchy. Not all, but many of them enamored with the party itself and not necessarily the ideas they had before. If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That actually reminds me of conversation we were having the other day about the problem with having a group with leaders, and you have these few loud voices and you're drawing other people, but they're still just following those loud voices. Whereas a better approach would be to attract people with the goodness of what you're doing. You have a loud voice, the people around you have a loud voice, and as people see that, you empower their voices so that they're doing the same versus just following. They're going back out into the world with their loud voice and creating other strong voiced people.
Yeah, absolutely. Everybody needs to have, more of a voice as opposed to just a few people speaking out and others following them. Like, I always speak against idolizing people because people are fallible. People make mistakes. People can switch, or people can have hidden agendas the whole time, and it's dangerous to put too much stock into even multiple.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a very fair and important point, is people can make mistakes, and it's from our perspective that these guys that are joining the LP are making a mistake. Obviously, it's not from their perspective, and who knows who's actually right here, leaning on our principles. Of course, that's where we find that we're correct. But I don't like throwing, the baby out with the bathwater. I think all of these people have done excellent things as far as spreading good principles. And then the thing that comes up when a political party is joined is, well, is everything previously said now negated? Does anything even matter anymore because of the switch in ideals?
Right? And when does it become detrimental? When do the people that had previously followed for these excellent ideals and points, and they follow them into the political parties and stuff, and they get them that are antithetical to their original principle.
Right, and in the case of Kokesh, calling to put down the principles, that obviously, that's just totally undermines, I think, everything he said before, even though there was some excellent stuff in there. It's just, it's saying, I thought this was correct, and now fuck all that. Let's do it this way. And that's something, I think, that's good that I haven't seen out of, say, Tom Woods and Mance Rayder, calling for just an abandonment of their previous principles. That's why this whole thing's really confusing to me with those two especially, is because they're still espousing the same principles, and it just doesn't seem like the action is there with it. And I was lucky enough to be able to have a little small interaction, actual personal interaction with Tom Woods the other day, through the Libertarian Party Mises Caucus, and I asked him. I said, I don't understand your reasoning for all of a sudden joining the Libertarian Party, and I really hope you can point me to either one of your podcasts or a video somewhere, or even answer me here and help me to understand this somehow. because that's what I'm interested in, is understanding it, seeing what's going on. And he actually did respond that he would be addressing it more deeply in an upcoming podcast. So I'm interested to hear that, because I think that's the hardest let go for me, would be letting go of the good stuff that Tom has brought to people's minds. It's just really great videos that I send out. That he has a playlist on his YouTube channel, and I think it's called Making the Libertarian Case, that I send to everybody who's interested in anything I have to say, and I've gotten nothing but positive feedback after they watch it.
Yeah, definitely with Tom. Like, I've only gotten to watch a few of his stuff. I don't know how I didn't know about him sooner. I'm amazed. But from what I've seen, the few podcasts and videos that I've seen him in, he's an extremely intelligent guy. And I definitely throw that baby out with the bathwater, like you always say. Even when he's talking about reasoning, although he doesn't seem to get into it too much in the videos that I watched, his reasoning for joining the Libertarian Party.
Well, the thing that I saw from his episode 1203 that I mentioned before, where he sat down with that roundtable for the Lions of Liberty podcast, is that he said he saw good and decent people fighting to do good things within the Libertarian Party, and he wanted to lend his support to them, his voice. And that's interesting, because there are claimed anarchists within the party that aren't voting and whatnot. And I'm sure you know there's an influx of libertarian socialists, I guess, libsocs, into the party, that, well, maybe a good thing that the Libertarian Party is being, corrupted and brought down by something like that, just so it's not a thing anymore. It also does not help the image for people who don't know the difference between small L and big L libertarian.
Well, I mean, anybody who is not familiar with libertarian thought theory, looking at the Libertarian Party, they're going to be put off. I mean, but it's been like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had forgotten about it. I had forgotten about Tom Wood saying that's an interesting point, that he basically, it was him saying that he saw a lot of good people, like you said. That's interesting. I wonder if he's going to vote.
From what I've gathered, I don't think he is. I think he's just putting his voice out there, and the people were really excited. The people involved in the Mises Caucus were obviously really excited that he's joined up, and there's been jokes going around in that circle with his face photoshopped onto a president in the White House. They all want Tom Woods to run, and he is vehemently denying that he will ever do that. So that's really good to see.
That's good. Then he's not completely, going against his principles. Getting involved in the Libertarian Party, in my opinion, isn't necessarily against voluntarist ideals. It's foolish, but it's not necessarily against, those principles completely. However, I think that voting, though people would argue with me that it's not coercion or violence, which doesn't even make sense to me, but voting is extremely, I push hard against it. There's no reason to be that level of politically active, especially when, in order to become a member of the Libertarian Party, you have to validate your membership by saying that you oppose the initiation of force to achieve political or social goals. And at that point, everybody should be kicked out of the party, right?
Yeah, you would think so. You would absolutely think so. And I agree completely. I'm 100% against voting. And I can't remember who brought up as a rebuttal to my, opposal to voting. Someone brought up Lysander Spooner's theory on defensive voting, which I'm embarrassed I haven't gone far enough into Spooner's work to read about that. That was something I was going to look at next, and maybe we'll get into that on a following podcast. But I don't know about defensive voting, but it's something I'd have to look into.
Yeah, I'm definitely down to do a podcast on some Spooner. I'm going to have to refresh my memory a bit of that specific book, but I'm more than willing to do a podcast on that in the future.
Awesome. Yeah, the idea of defensive voting is kind of interesting. I'd like to see what he has to say about that. So it's good to that we're kind of talking about now that being involved with the Libertarian Party isn't necessarily the wrong path, I guess, whereas taking action in politics would be more against, bringing down the state. It's just that ridiculous method, because that's something that Mance Rayder actually says as well, is that he's not going to vote. He's just going to be a voice within the party, bringing, I guess, he's self-proclaimed ANCAP, so his ANCAP ideals outward.
Yeah, voting, I don't even see how defensive voting is even a thing, but maybe just trying to vote no on everything. Voting to reduce taxes, but again, it can all be easily undone.
Yeah, absolutely, easily undone. And like we mentioned before, like Conkin says, it would take a millennia to repeal all the laws that are on the books, to the point of repealing the entire government. It's ridiculous. There's some interesting stuff in Mance's podcasts where he talks. I think episode 129 was his episode that he put out, if anyone wants to check that out, explaining his reasoning for joining the party. And like we said, it sounded like a place of fear, with the collapse and whatnot. But it was also really off-putting in that specific episode, listening to what he had to say, because he was calling everyone else that wasn't getting involved, basement dwellers. And, he says, what the fuck have you done? And that's not really a good logical argument when you're trying to get people to understand why you've done something. Attacking them for supposedly not doing anything when you don't know who you're specifically talking to. He says, I have a fucking podcast. I've written 2 books. What have you done? You've sat in your basement. And that's not an argument, as people like to say.
Don't go mauling you now.
Yeah, no, I won't do that. I just like telling people not an argument because it's hilarious. But yeah, in episode 138 of his podcast, he talks with a guy named Jeremiah Harding, who is trying to coin the term anarcho-coalitionism, which is the willingness to work with anyone whose goal is to reach freedom and a voluntary society. And he actually spoke to Mance on that podcast. He said he does not think that joining a political party is the correct path, and yet he's still willing to work with Mance, obviously, and other people involved, anyone actually, any anarcho anything, as long as the goal is the end goal is the voluntary society. What do you think about that? Can we work with anybody and everybody, or are there some people that would bring more harm than good?
I think it's a good idea to try and align yourself with people who have at least a similar end goal. But then it gets into does the ends justify the means kind of talk, what are they doing to reach that goal? Is it going to be detrimental to even reaching that goal? Is it going to help reach that goal, or is it actually do more harm,
Mm-hmm.
And I say education and getting the information out there to people is one of the most important things to do. And I could see anarcho-coalitionism being beneficial to that to some degree.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you think about that?
Well, it's an interesting one because we had a conversation with a mutual acquaintance the other day about Antifa and whether or not working with Antifa is beneficial. And if I don't think working with a group that is clearly okay with violence towards others who don't hold their same ideals, as well as suppressing their thoughts and speech, I don't see how that something like that could be considered a good alliance at all.
Well, if you believe in a peaceful society, a peaceful voluntary society, that's the opposite.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up education, sharing the information, because that really is the hardest thing about moving forward. I think it's the great work, the worthiest challenge, is to educate every single individual on the true meaning of freedom, what voluntarism is, and to see 100% positive results obviously would be the goal as far as people's intake of that information. And whether or not that's realistic is something else. It's not like if absolutely everyone, didn't take that information and run with it, there would be a problem. Referring back to Konkin's New Libertarian Manifesto, there's going to be pockets of statism, but small pockets of statism aren't going to affect an overwhelming population of voluntarists.
Exactly. And to reference Konkin again, the people that are in those pockets are going to see people living freely and voluntarily, want to know what that's all about. So
yeah, and
they're going to want to leave.
Yeah, absolutely, leave. Exactly. Escape those statist shitholes that they're stuck in.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. There's always going to want to put the responsibility that they should put on themselves. They're going to want to put it on somebody else, whether that be coming from a place of laziness or just not feeling up to the task. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. Just one thing real quick to touch kind of back on the names we've been talking about here, as far as their reasoning to join. Something I think every single one of them except for Tom Woods brought up was the influence of Ron Paul, and how seeing that whole thing happen, the Ron Paul revolution, really inspired them and a lot of other people. And everyone that is referencing that is saying that they're looking for another Ron Paul-esque inspiration, and they're following others that they respect who have joined the LP. And I can definitely understand looking for inspiration and motivation. The following others part, I mean, it's still following, no matter who you're following or where you're following, and that's not probably the best idea for independence at all. But I can see the draw of another large scale inspiring movement pulling people in. And that's an interesting thing that I think every single person has brought up besides Tom Woods as their reasoning to join the LP.
Yeah, Ron Paul is a good point, but it's following another figurehead. And sure, he definitely brought a lot of publicity to certain, I would guess, ideologies that the mainstream public didn't know about. And some of the people followed through to the logic of, a voluntary stateless society. Yes. But others, again, got bogged down in the party politics. It became all about the Libertarian Party. To me, Ron Paul is an example of you can't change the government from inside the government.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Because, that there's been a ton of articles and podcasts and everything I've seen actually lately about that, and what has Ron Paul accomplished. And even he says, nothing. I haven't accomplished anything. I was in there, nothing. I wasn't able to get anything done, and now I'm out. As far as politics, as far as inspiring people, that's a whole nother story. And I think, being voices coming from the Libertarian Party like these guys want to be, inspiring people's great. But look where you're coming from, and really think about that when you decide to align yourself with that group.
Definitely. Caucus has always encouraged the tendency towards more hardcore, consistent position, and not so much ideas, and even scorn ideas. I use that word scorn specifically.
Absolutely.
And that's at least why I'm outspoken against political parties, voting in general.
Yes, for sure.
It doesn't benefit.
Yeah, it really doesn't benefit anything there. So, kind of bringing things back around here, some of the effects of joining the Libertarian Party or attempting to use government channels to achieve freedom. The negative effects that we've talked about, legitimizes government, that whole process. A really big one that I think is a major roadblock in a lot of people's minds is authority. It legitimizes the myth of authority. There's no such fucking thing as authority. Nobody has the right to tell somebody else what to do. No adult has the right to tell another adult what to do. Let's put it like that. Authority is in your mind. There's literally nothing besides force, which is illegitimate, that makes telling someone else what to do a legitimate thing.
Exactly. It goes back to, how are you going to give these supposed, powers, these rights to tell others what to do to another person? Even you don't have the ability to tell others what to do. So how is it that this group of people putting that power onto another person, entity, whatever it may be, how does that legitimize it? It doesn't. It's an illusion. Authority is nothing but an illusion.
That's right.
It comes from a pleasure.
Sorry, can't cut you off there. Go ahead. Keep going. Where does it come from?
It almost always, in my opinion, comes from a place of fear, of not knowing what's going to happen, sometimes being afraid of change. People don't want things to change, so they'll try to give the power to somebody else to keep it the same. I see that a lot with the like traditional and the alt-right types, to be honest. They're afraid of change. They don't want things to change. They see change as a negative instead of a positive.
Yeah, absolutely.
What are you talking about?
Now, this is something that kind of just popped into my head right now as far as the negative effects of joining the LP, is the split. And the whole thing that we're talking about here, the whole reason we're actually even having this conversation is because there are those who are for and those who are against joining the Libertarian Party and using that as their means to an end. And is that is obviously negative, that there's a split. And I guess my question would be, like, is there a fault here? Is someone at fault, or is this just a natural thing that happens? Because looking at some of the reasoning as far as, like we talked about, seeing the Ron Paul revolution and wanting to have that again, one of the really divisive things I've heard from it was Mance Raider who said it, is saying, if you're under 35 and you're a libertarian, it's because of Ron Paul, hands down. And that's just blatantly not true, and kind of a just a shitty thing to tell people, to tell them that he knows why. This is why. Therefore, my reasoning is correct. And I say bullshit. I've always had, I don't know why, but a really anti-authority, anarchist attitude ever since I was a kid, and I didn't follow politics at all because of that, let alone the, you know, the 07-08 Ron Paul revolution. I wasn't interested in that. I had a fucking sweet punk band that I was going around, you know, singing about anarchy, playing shows, and it was fucking awesome. I guess that was spreading some of the ideals and whatnot, but I wasn't, obviously doing things like a podcast or speaking out other than through music. But, you know, is that a fault of people who are claiming that joining the LP is the way to go, trying to tell other people that they know why and therefore they should do this?
Yeah, a lot of people seem to like to paint everyone with a broad stroke. It's probably just easier to do so. But I was like you. I have never been a fan of authoritarianism. I've always been opposed to it since I was little. And I saw Ron Paul and that whole thing, the revolution, the Ron Paul revolution, as almost a joke. I had friends at the time talking to me about it, and I would just laugh. Like, it's another politician telling you things that aren't going to happen, and you're getting excited about it. Yeah, these things sound great, but it's unrealistic the way they're going about trying to get them.
Yeah, I agree. I don't fault any of these guys for their conviction and their good intentions, but good intentions only get so far if you don't follow through with correct actions.
Exactly. Consistency is so important, and there seems to be a lack of it anymore within the anarchist or the libertarian.
Yeah, for sure. So, kind of at the risk of the classic rebuttal to a lot of criticisms that I know I see, and I know you always see, the rebuttal being, all right, well, what's your fucking solution? There are solutions. We talk with people, I know, online about this all the time. There are solutions. Agorism is a tool. It's something that can be used to achieve freedom, obviously, and hand in hand with that, decentralization, which is the opposite of joining a political party, getting the power out of the hands of a few and putting it in the individual's hands.
Exactly. I try to promote agorism as much as I can, because I personally see it as the only way, in my mind, to achieve a peaceful, voluntary society. You know, and it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, Conkin said that his works are incomplete, and sadly he died before we got more from him.
Mm-hmm.
But it's pretty straightforward, and the books aren't very long either. And I mean, I think we're still in. To reference the New Libertarian Manifesto, I think we're still definitely phase 0 of his layout of reaching stateless society.
I agree.
And
there's a lot of work ahead.
He speaks about anti-political campaigning a lot in that, and and then what we've been saying is the best strategy is still to live counter economically and self-sustainably, and relying on oneself instead of others.
Yeah, absolutely. Personal responsibility, and there's nothing wrong with building a community either. That's not collectivism to work with other people around you with the same ideals at all. It's like what was his name? Jeremiah Harding. His saying, anarcho-coalitionism. It's totally fine to work with people who have the same goals and the same values to empower the individual, to decentralize everything. And that's something, as far as decentralization, blockchain, which that's a hard thing to get into, and something I've barely scratched the surface of. And yet doing that has me almost as excited as when I discovered agorism and reading Konkin's books. It's extremely exciting to see the potential for decentralization and just the control that can be put into the hands of the individual, of their contracts, their money, their interactions. It's huge.
Exactly. And God, I can't remember who it was. I feel like it was Rothbard who made their rebuttal to Konkin's class theory. And in it, he said that, and I may be wrong by who it was, but he said that it only speaks to the marginal class. But I mean, these books were written, years and years ago. But now with the advent of blockchain technology, cryptocurrencies, and 3D printers, and all the new technology that we have, that everybody has at disposal. Like, yeah, it may be a little pricey, some of the things, but I mean, if you got hundreds of dollars that you have to pay, in terrible things like taxes, without those, you could purchase.
Yeah, and it's not always going to be super expensive. I mean, that's just the way of technology. As it gets more widespread and commonplace, and more people start putting out the products, it's going to get cheaper.
Oh yeah, it already has, drastically, in just a few years.
Absolutely. So on that positive note, I think that was an excellent conversation on all of this. I didn't want to get too negative on anybody that we talked about. Just wanted to see if we could question the reasoning behind trying to use party politics to achieve freedom. I think we brought up some good questions, had some good answers, and really had a great conversation. Where can people find you online? What should people look for, David?
Well, they can find me by looking me up on Facebook. I go by my name, David Valentine, with a V, not a V. Or I run Black Market Memes, a Facebook page, and I sell a bunch of, anarchist, libertarian wares, shirts, tapestries, hoodies, you name it. I probably got it, at least clothing-wise. But that's where I'm at.
Awesome. Yeah, check out Black Market Memes. Check out David's shirts, tapestries, all that stuff. Let's see. Well, you can find me just Nick Irwin on Facebook as well if you want to. Something I'm interested in kind of growing is something that you started that I'm now helping out with, is the Washington State Anarchists and Libertarians Facebook group. Definitely look that up on Facebook. I'd like to, fill that with members of people here in the state of Washington, so we can get working together face to face. That's something I think is really important. So that's the Washington State Anarchists and Libertarians Facebook group. And as far as this here Enemy of the States Dank pod stash, we're going to keep filling up your pod stash with other good episodes in the future. Right now, this will be released on YouTube. We have a Facebook under the same name. Probably be out. Well, it'll be out when you're hearing this, obviously, and we'll add more to it. All right, David, thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward to the next one.
All right. Later.
See ya.